All right, we're going to go ahead and call this joint meeting of the Assembly Public Safety Committee and the Assembly Committee on Homelessness. Let's go ahead and do a round of introductions, starting with Doug, going around the table.
Eric Croft.
Felix Rivera.
Dick Trainee.
Forrest Dunbar.
John Weddleton.
Jim Steele. Pete Peterson.
Suzanne LeGrand.
Fred Dyson.
Felix.
Yeah, it's over there.
You give me tough.
Yeah. And if we can have the audience identify themselves, please.
Anthony Bueller, with Royal Council.
I'm Scott Weininger. I'm with the Fairbanks House Homeless Coalition.
Eric Black, Assembly Blacksmith. My name is Joshua Spring. I'm the Assembly aide for Suzanne LeGrand.
Patricia Kenish, citizen.
Daryl Best.
Kim Coble, Beans Cafe and Children's Lunchbox.
John Rada, Parks and Recreation.
Football team, the municipal attorney.
Lynn McKinnon, the new Department of Health and Human Services.
Fiona Johnson, Clifford Center.
Okay, so for those who didn't get the documents, all of them are on the side table there, along with an agenda. So brief agenda today. As always, as I like to do when we're talking about the subject of homelessness, understanding this is a very complicated and emotional issue, so please, if we could keep our comments respectful and insightful. Difficult combination, I know. Just really quick, big picture. So we're going to be talking today mainly about camp abatement. One part of a lot of different levers when we talk about homelessness, from stabilization in shelters, transitioning into case-managed housing, preventative work, treatment, and the list goes on. So today we're going to be fleshing out resources needed for abatement, but in my opinion, doing this must really be contingent on resources for the whole big picture. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Falsey, who I believe has a presentation on how we got where we are now.
Didn't mean to Mr.
Sure,
Yeah.
go ahead, Mr. Falsey.
Didn't mean to oversell Mr. Falsey. Mr. Falsey gave a presentation to, it's hard to do, but gave a presentation to us on the history of the litigation. And so what I'd like to do is just have his assistant, would you mind coming up? And I have his presentation, but really I wasn't asking him to so much do it again as help me do a recap so that we can understand some of that history for those that haven't had it or the public. So without redoing your very fine PowerPoint presentation, we originally had a 24 or 12. There was a 5-day. Well, tell us a little bit about the history. That is, how did the litigation start? My understanding from your presentation, from looking at it myself, is sort of the 5-day got struck down, and that's where we ended with the 15. But there were indications of a 10-day, that a 10-day might be appropriate, both from the municipality's other disposal of found properties ordinance and some of the indications from the court.
All right. Through the chair, I will see if I can conjure up all this from memory. I apologize. I did not know I would be giving a presentation today, and I have to leave at 11:10. But my recollection of the history is that the abatement of illegal campsites, the Assembly took 3 bites at that apple. Initially, it said we're going to be able to abate campsites, meaning clean them up, remove the property, and destroy it within 24 hours. That caused quite an uproar. The Assembly then went back and said, fine, we will notice it, and after 5 days, we will abate the campsites. That precipitated litigation. The lawsuit was entitled Engel versus the Municipality of Anchorage. The court, Judge Morris, ruled that that was an insufficient amount of time to protect the due process rights of people whose property was involved in the abated campsite. And of note, the court compared the 5-day window in the municipality's ordinance to other timelines in the municipal code. So for instance, took note of the fact that when the police department takes property for safekeeping, they would hold on to it for 10 days. Other parts of the code have even longer timelines. After the municipality lost that lawsuit, there was no appeal. There was some letter traffic from the ACLU at the time that had said perhaps 10 business days would be an appropriate amount of time. Within the lawsuit, I don't remember exactly what the litigation position was. It may have been 15 days, but suffice to say, when the dust finally settled, the assembly revised the ordinance to say if the property that is going to be collected from the campsite is not going to be stored for later collection, the campsite will not be abated until there is a 15-day notice period. What the smallest amount of notice that could legally be offered is an unknown. We know from the court decision that 5 days is not enough, and we know that no one has sued us over 15 days, and there seems to be at least a rough consensus that that is a sufficient amount of time. Whether you could move to 10 business days or 10 days is a question for the assembly and also for the courts to sort out if anyone challenges it.
Yeah, I apologize for sandbagging. I knew you had only a little bit of time, so I wanted to get you, but I didn't mean to have you do, which you did very well, a presentation off the cuff after just having reviewed it. That sets, I guess, the legal framework. We're here not just about whether we get sued and whether we win, though those are important considerations, but what is appropriate to do. And the reason that I presented this is from a lot of community council meetings, from a lot of talking to people who are concerned about homeless camps in their area, worry that the timeline is so long that it makes it seem like no action is happening at all, that there is a possibly justifiable feeling that their complaints weren't heard. Even if it is being heard, there's some justice delayed is justice denied is a quote from the law, but it can be that when you do a complaint, even if it is eventually acted on, if it isn't in some reasonable period of time, it doesn't feel like it was. And at some point, it really wasn't. So whether we could lower that time, and it led to a very good discussion, which I hope we'll expand on or reproduce here today, about what does the notice mean? How far away can you move? If there have been at least allegations that camps just moved 100 yards away. Again, I don't know how true that is, but that doesn't feel like that something got done. There was discussion about, can you say you have an illegal camp in, say, Valley of the Moon Park, don't come back to Valley of the Moon Park. There was even discussion about, can you do a citywide camp ban, which I just off the top of my head think probably would have a lot of problems. And there's a concern, and I put it in the introduction to it, the memo. I mean, we whether the ACLU were out there or not, we would want to strike a balance between compassion for the people that are in that situation and an illegal and inappropriate housing situation. The ability to have a park that is usable, but the ability for people who are in a very rough situation to have some place to go and live. And I've spent a lot of time since introducing talking about making sure that we have at least the structure and the distinct possibility of some place for them to go. That is, it's inappropriate, maybe even with 15 days, but arguably more with 10, to kick somebody out when you have no reasonable options for them. So all those were concerns as I did it. Appreciate your summary. He did send that to me, and I make it available to anyone that wants it. It sets the legal stage, but we're more than that, right? We're talking about what is appropriate, not just what some other entity might or might not sue us on, or what some other branch of government might say was the right. We want to reassure ourselves that it is the right balance we're striking.
So, Mr. Kratz, I have a couple questions. Mr. Peterson,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so right now, we're set with 15 days, but that's 15 calendar days, that's not 15 business days, is that right?
Through the chair, that's correct, but I will also remind the Assembly that there are 3 different options. There's the 15-day notice abatement, which is to say, if this property is not removed, it will be abated and destroyed. There's 72 hours, which is a theoretical possibility that allows us to put a notice that the property will be removed within 72 hours and stored. And finally, there's some kind of emergency exception which allows you to do it much more quickly. In practice, the 72-hour abatement has not, to my knowledge, been used much at all. It has been used, but very rarely, because the challenges of storing this material have proven too high. But anyway, the answer to the question is yes, but it's currently calendar.
And if I could, one more. Has anyone appealed the fact that their camp was tagged and they were asked to leave? Because there is, I read in here, there is a right to appeal, but I don't know. I haven't heard of anyone appealing.
Through the chair, not to my knowledge, and I will then also pivot to say, as I disappear from the room in the next few minutes, you are also in the capable hands of Dean Gates, who is the attorney who personally shepherded all of these legal changes and the lawsuit through. So you have the real expert, and I can stop trying to tell the story.
Okay.
If I may.
Sure, Mr. Gates.
Thank you. I wanted to add about
I was
appeal.
gonna charge him for you to
So
start.
prior to that ACL lawsuit, was in the process to appeal to the AHO's office here on the 7th floor.
I see.
And we had it expedited. We have to have a hearing within 5 days and so forth. After the lawsuit, we revised the code, the process we just described. The appeal process is now appeal goes from notice to courthouse. So no doubt that is happening as far as I know. I think that's more difficult process for persons to follow than the process we have in place to the ranger's office. But that's where we have it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Steele?
Do we, when we clean up the campsite, do we store what we clean up? And if so, for how long? One person's treasure is another person's trash. But, they were complaining about IDs being lost and things like that on the cleanup. And I just wondered, do we now currently store things for a period of time?
I think that was best answered by APD in parts, but I believe the PD is no. We are not storing anything because the practical difficulties of cataloging and storing this stuff. We just really have no place to put it.
And storage space.
And a lot of the material is
Hazardous.
And,
Hazardous.
Okay, well, that leads us in a direction of what kind of solution we take.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Dyson?
So I'm perhaps like others are new here, trying to play catch up. But I would assume that the rules are a little different if it is private property or if it is a park where it is illegal to be there after 9 p.m. or something, that the requirements for removing trespass material are different. Tell me what's...
Dean should tell you, but on private property, I think you can evict just right there. You have no right to be on my property, you can leave. Public property is, illegal public camping is what we're talking about here, but Dean should do that.
But if I may follow up.
Mr. Dyson is correct. Public property and private property are completely different situations and different law that applies to trespass action. I mean, if someone were camping in my yard, I threw away their tent, then it would be an action between that person and myself. Private action for conversion of the property. So nothing to do with this abating the process.
Yeah.
If
I may
the person who trespassed.
follow up. But practically speaking, if it's your house, that's fine, but there are large tracts of property, private property there, nobody living on it, so on and so forth, and you could, and so on. But Valley of the Moon Park, I would think that it's not only illegal camping, but it's being in a public facility past the hours where they're supposed to be. So it's breaking a more higher priority law, if you will, and all of us are concerned about kids and others wandering around in the parks at night thinking there's nobody there, you know, and so on. So I would think we have less restrictions on what we do with the trespass property if indeed they're there illegally, not just period, because of the time restrictions and so on.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Gates.
I would just add on Title 25 has a prohibition on camping on public land or in parks after hours that are posted. It's a $75 fine. Issuing those citations to people engaged in that activity, I don't think it's been very effective. That's why we have this different approach, even from side being.
I don't want to belabor this, but
Yes, you do.
what we're talking about is, what do we do with the property? Do we have less responsibility to the owner of the property when they are camping in a spot that's precluded by law, like the park?
Well, all of these, almost all of them are illegal camping and, for a significant amount of the time, illegal presence. So I think it's both. I think, you know, you have a right to be in the park during the day, but they're staying at night. And as I think Dean said, it's 10 o'clock, you have to leave if they have a camp. I don't know that we do that so much as say, this camp needs to go, this process. I may still be missing you, but I think that's the answer.
Nothing further, Mr. Dyson? All right. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the last meeting, an example of a homeless camp near a school was brought up. And I was wondering if I could get clarification. Would that be an instance where the 24-hour approach could be worked to remove that camp?
Is there someone from APD that could answer that?
Well, I think Dean,
Oh, okay. In the last meeting, an example of a homeless camp near a school came up, and I was wondering if under the 24-hour provision, that could be used to remove that camp in that case. Depends how close the camp is. Sometimes it's really long. This is a playground where we have a gated area. We use the is there anybody there? We've never had something that close to the campsite. Yes. I've never used it. We've never had it.
And actually, ma'am, if you could say your name for the record, please. Thank you. Do you have any further follow-up?
Follow-up question would be, is that camp that was identified, I think, near Rogers Park Elementary, is it still there by the school? And I don't know how close, but does anyone know, or if it's still there or has been removed? I saw some people nodding their heads.
Yeah, but that's a question that we could ask the administration. Mr. Gates.
I would just like to clarify Mr. Woodton's statement about the law. There's no 24-hour provision. That was a prior ordinance. That's not the law now. We have the 72-hour notice provision and the 15-day notice provision. And then we have an emergency provision. And I'm going to read it to you understand. It's in 15-2020 would be 15G, the exceptions to those standard notice provisions. 2 says, where exigent circumstances posing a serious risk to human life and safety exist, the abatement of campsite we proceed without prior notice. Personal property still has to be stored for that 30-day period. So that's, I think, what you're referring to. There's no 24 hours.
And for folks who want to look at the code, I printed out copies of it. So the first page has the 72 hours and 15 days. And if you just flip it to the back, it has the exceptions. And one of those is what Mr. Gates just read. Mr. Weddleton, allergy on this.
Question for maybe John Roddick. Is there any park in Anchorage that does not have a time limit? Are they all open, or are most of them open 24 hours? Or is,
Standard park hours are 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. Closed 11 p.m. to 6 a.m.
is that all at Kincaid Park, all at Chester Creek, Greenbelt, Far
That's
North
the
Bicentennial
standard.
Park?
That's the standard. There are areas where there are exceptions, some by use of the facilities, and some actually by request of the community councils or neighborhoods. There are some that close at 10. That's about the latest. There are some that open at 7 or 8. But the standard is a 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. opening, and then closed after 11.
So if I'm skiing at Bicentennial Park at midnight, I'm breaking the rule. Right. I'm just, I mean, you won't.
Just don't leave your skis
Laws
there.
of humanity.
There are people that are out, some are labs that are out 24 hours. Okay, that's not really what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about what we're trying to cope with, which is much different than casual recreational use.
No, I understand. I just want to get a sense of that. You know, what's something I think it's like what Suzanne said. You know, we do the marijuana stuff. We have these separation distances from a whole bunch of protected uses and so on. And I mean, you know, people are really frustrated. They aren't comfortable using our parks because they're overrun by people that make them nervous. Whether they're good or bad or not, people aren't using these incredible parks because they're nervous. And maybe we need to have different standards within spheres of influence, kind of like we do in marijuana. If you're inside of a school or something like that, it's a different rule. You got to go. You got to go right now. Pack up your stuff. And you know, or if you're, you know, marijuana, if you got a distance from a playground. So if you're in Valley of the Moon, that's too close. You got to go now. No sticking around. No 72 hours. No 24 hours. It's 11 o'clock. Get out of here. And then their option is to go deep into Bicentennial Park, I guess. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Whittleton. Mr. Steele.
Yeah, just a point to make. It doesn't matter how close you are to a school or anything. I remember when my kids were young, they would walk down to Valley of the Moon Park as a class and spend a part of the day down there. They're accessible at any authorized time. I mean, I never cared whether it was 11 o'clock or 4 a.m. 4 a.m. You know, they're used by the public. It's public property, and these people are members of the public, but it's not a campsite. It's not a designated campsite. They're not using it in that manner. You know, we ought to be able to give reasonable notice and protect their goods if it's a short period of time. I think that a reasonable notice and not protected if we're giving a more than reasonable period of time. They need to know that there's a risk of leaving your valuables there if you camp there illegally and they're left for the day or something. Anyway, it's a dicey situation. There's a lot of variables, but we've got to do something. So.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I think we're all in agreement there. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I am trying to look through this code and also the new ordinance and I apologize if I'm just not seeing it, but we've been talking about 15 business days. Is that right, Dean? For the current, is it 15 days or 15 business days?
Currently, it's 15 calendar days.
Okay.
Before the last year, we changed it. It was 5 business days.
Okay.
Now it's 15 calendar days.
Okay.
And I think Mr. Cross ordinance is 10 calendar days.
Okay, great. Yeah, because looking through here, I didn't see business days anywhere, so I was confused why that kept creeping into our discussion. But that's good. I mean, there's as everyone here knows, kind of regardless of what we do, there's a huge difference between 15 calendar days and 15 business days. Or 15 calendar days can be shorter than 10 business days, right? If we're doing this practically speaking, or it can be right around the same length. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for that clarification. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Croft.
So, Mr. Rodham, maybe we'll have you up generally, but if if I have the legal 15-day abatement, and then, and so we have the authority to dispose of all of that, and most of it is in a condition where it doesn't appear valuable. Is there any practice if you run across something that is clearly valuable, a jewelry box, a wallet, a
Gold
set of
medal
pictures,
or Purple Heart?
Purple Heart gold medal? Is there any different procedure for something so clearly valuable that we set that aside, or is it all just as common sense? And would you mind coming up with maybe a couple other questions?
Through the chair, Mr. Croft, we have not come across anything of what I would call direct value. And Officer Jones would maybe weigh in as well. When a camp is posted and 15 days is up, typically the inhabitants have moved on. They have collected whatever they have that they want to take with them. What's left behind is what we clean up. We don't come across wallets, Purple Hearts, jewelry boxes, etc. We come across pretty nasty conditions, hazmat conditions, stolen property. We've collected a little over, by our current count, over 200 propane tanks. Those are easily accessible. That's a big deal. Bicycles, chop shops, snowboards, barbecues. They don't come with serial numbers. They've been ground off. There's no way of knowing where they came from other than the general proximity, possibly where they're at. When people leave, they take whatever they're taking with them, and they move 500 feet, 800 feet, 1,000 feet, across the creek, down the street, wherever they go, and we clean up. And then somebody else calls a few days later and says, we have a report, goes into AnkWorks, and it's a new site. And we start over. But we never really start over because we've never caught up. And that's part of the problem. There's been over, as of last week, over 550 reports for this year, since we started recording under AnkWorks, for 991 sites. Now, a lot of that's repetition. Lots of people see the same thing. They call in about the same place. But we have an active log of about 200 sites, to put it in perspective. And we've already, as of this year, as of actually last week, hauled 144 tons to the landfill. So what's left behind is not valuable stuff. Typically, it's junk, garbage, feces, needles. It's a combination of things that are not something you're going to collect and store.
Who do you use to do this cleanup? Who does it actually?
2 crews. We have a community work service, but they do a variety of things for the city in many different ways. And we had last year and this year, we had a dedicated 10-person homeless camp cleanup crew. And that's what they were focused on within the funding that we had available, about 17 weeks. And combined between the 2 community work service for the year and the 17 weeks of the homeless cleanup crew, they're just about equal in the amount of debris that was collected by them. We're still not done. There's an effort now to do some more work down at the old A&S site. And we, again, constantly have other reports. So there's a long list. I know people are frustrated, but you can only do so much with the resources you have. And it's pretty broadly spread around this city.
Final question, I'll go back to the queue, but, and I've heard from talking to the municipal prosecutor, Ms. Stino, that there may be a way to get you more of the community work service people, that you and she might be talking about how we could send more community work service your way. Is that a discussion that's going on?
There was a meeting, Nancy, what was it, 2 weeks ago? I think is what it was, when we met. Talking about possibly different tools, constructing new tools, additional crews, working with the court system, working with the prosecutor's office, working with the funding that we have in hand for homeless cleanups. I'm trying to figure out how to massage that instead of having a crew. Possibly, if there are more community work service participants, then we would create teams and take those numbers instead of having. And I should probably clarify: community work service is not consistent.
Mm-hmm.
You can have one person one day, you can have 8 people another day. There's nothing, you can't count on a number. You get what you get. These people report because they have hours to serve. But the intent or possibility of the conversation is that if there are more people directed from the courts to do community work service, we would have more bodies, not knowing exactly how many, but let's say we have 20. Well, that's the equivalency of having 2 crews, which doubles basically our efforts. We get more, we would train up, possibly even get, who knows, maybe 3 crews. But there's no guarantee. Because they're going to come from the court system to the community work service program, do the hours. It would be our responsibility to direct those people based on that long list, and then just continue what we started.
Okay. So, Mr. Weddleton, did you have a question for Mr. Rada?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to you.
Sure.
Mr. Steele.
Yeah, John, I know it's a big task. I guess the first question is, how long does it take you to get to it after that date goes by? Are you on it quickly, or it's just when you have the resources to do it?
I know people don't want to hear it, but the list is very long. Some sites, you don't walk in one day and clean it up. You can be there a week. Some of them are truly of the magnitude that, and you have to be, the other piece is you have to be careful. Because we're dealing with unclean conditions, unsafe conditions, you have to be aware of what you are actually getting yourself into. You have to have PPE provided. So when you're dealing with sharps, broken glass, feces, bed bugs, there's a lot. So you don't just randomly jump in, and start doing stuff. So you have to exercise caution and try and do it as quickly as possible. But the amount of materials that are oftentimes in some of these camps is well beyond what you can imagine.
Tools, vehicles, are those things available?
What do you mean?
In order to get into it, haul things off,
front end loader.
that type of stuff.
We provide
Shovels and rakes.
through our resources, right, through Parks and Rec and Community Work Service. We provide the tools,
Gloves.
the trucks. Yeah, we have to do that.
But I mean, it's not a hindrance to operation to use your vehicles for that, as opposed to hauling fertilizer for a park, a ball field or something like that.
No, we have enough vehicles and we dispatch the crews. It's just something that we do. It's part of the mission.
Big job.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Dyson.
As usual, John, you have my sympathy. It's going to be really non-rewarding job. Can you give me just a back of the envelope estimate of what it costs per year to do all the cleanup work you're doing?
Probably back of the napkins would be with vehicles, labor, materials, landfill costs. It's run probably close to $200,000.
Yeah, respectfully, I think that's way underestimated. But be that as it may. So, in previous conversations I've had with Nancy on the homeless problem, I understood what I was told we're spending something north of $50,000 a year per homeless person. And she's informed me that there was a floating population of somewhere around 900. Now, the mayor has told me that the 50,000 figure is for the 400 hardcore homeless. And I wouldn't be surprised if the efforts John's organization puts in are not counted in that 50,000. But it's one of the many sorts of things. So my reason for bringing it up, we're talking about a serious, I was going to say rat hole, but a place where public money is going and it goes on forever. And so that if there were drastic solutions to all of this that were expensive, you don't have to go very far out that to start saving money. For every person you get off the street that's a $50,000 a year cost place, get into some adult numbers pretty quick. So, thanks, John. Just a person at your level, total cost for us is north of $100,000 a year. If you've got several of your staff, whatever level they are, that are into it, that's what makes me doubt your $200,000 estimate to do this work on an ongoing basis.
That number is dedicated based on the homeless cleanup crews, the landfill costs, the actual time, labor, vehicle rental, this is a pool you get charged for. Well, all of those things we can account for. Beyond that, my time, community work service time, other people's time, it's not in there, but these are costs we can quantify.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this goes back to what I think Tim was getting at, and I think, Mr. Roddy, you've already kind of explained this, but I want to have a more explicit conversation about it. So you talk about it takes us a number of days to clean up one of these camps. And I assume because the list is so long, it takes us a little while to get out to that camp as well. So I think what you said is that, when that 15-day notice runs out, it's typically you guys aren't there on that day. Am I mistaken on that?
We try to stay abreast of the abatement timing.
Okay.
We know the camps, particularly larger ones, and those that are more recognizable, call it by, say, size and volume. We hear a lot about those. We work with APD, the CAP team, and make sure that in fact the notice is correct. Sometimes there's gray area, but most of the time we know. And we go back and visit that site to make sure they've left. And depending on if we can address it immediately, we'll try to do that so that it's gone.
On the day that notice expires. All right. Okay.
We make an effort, if it's possible, with the resources we have.
Great.
Okay? To try to stay abreast of it. But figure out very quickly you can't.
Right.
Okay? And so I think that's the heartburn with a lot of people, is that the camp is there, the abatement's there. If it's posted on ambulance, it's got a whole list of all these things.
Sure.
And then people see it hasn't been done. The other piece that often comes into play, quite honestly, is that there are priorities that are established by people above me. There are common denominators, unfortunately, 3rd Avenue. When you get down to Dean's and Leather Francis, you've got the ANS, the old ANS site, the Bluff, down by the RV park. And you've got other situations where you have other people that might be in danger. So when you've got both residents and guests in town, let's say they're at the RV park or there's some other circumstance, there's often a need, okay, to address that site quickly or attempt to do something to help. So the 3rd Avenue area is frequented by us at least once a week, if not twice, just because of the visibility and the amount of material back to answering your question, no, we can't keep up with all the sites.
So can I ask a quick follow-up?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So you sort of answered my question here, but if the real limiting factor isn't the legal limit, that is, it's not the 15 days or the 10 days, if it actually takes us, say, 20 days, practically speaking, to get out to these sites anyway, then it wouldn't really matter if we change from 15 to 10 because, practically speaking, there's not going to be a difference. However, I think what you're saying is, we've got this list, but there are ones that we can jump up to the top and prioritize if they're dangerous, for example. And if that's the case, then there is a real difference between 15 days and 10 days, because that's 5 more days where we could prioritize that camp. Is that what you're saying? Or part of what you're saying?
The limiting factor is bodies. I mean, whether it's 5 days, 10 days, 15 days, it's the bodies to do the work.
But that sort of militates against us passing this ordinance, because what you're saying is it doesn't matter if it's 10 days, it doesn't matter if it's 5 days, it doesn't matter if it's 15 days, it's the number of bodies. But I think that probably the sponsor of this ordinance would interpret it as, well, no, that's not true if we can make priority decisions like you're saying.
You know, you can argue it or debate it any way you want. For us, the limiting factor is how many people we have to dispatch to do cleanup. And if we had 50 bodies, we could respond faster, more efficiently, make a bigger difference. The list would get shorter. If it's a 5 day, a 10 day, a 15 day, we still wait for that time, but we would maybe catch up, and then there wouldn't be this long list. We wouldn't be prioritizing. We'd be hitting them as they're noticed. Wait for the abatement, get the cleanup done. So the equation is very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. So before we move on to the rest of the queue, so this meeting was noticed until noon. The agenda says until 12:30. My advice from Amanda Moser, clerk staff, is that we can go until 12:30. Can members stay that long?
John and I have to go to another engagement, but
I'm gone to court till.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll try to get through all of your guys' points, but we'll go ahead and go until 12:30 then. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just going to go through a timeline experience that I had the last week of August when I was out taking a walk one morning in our beautiful new Muldoon Chasnu Park. I walked up to the top of the hill, and there was a tent that wasn't there the day before. And before I even got completely around my walk, I ran into a neighbor who was walking her dog who'd already noticed the tent, who was on her phone calling in the campsite immediately. So it hadn't even been there 24 hours. And the tail end of last week, I sent an email to Josh over at the Parks Department to let him know that, yes, that camp had been tagged quite a while ago by the police department, and that there had been no one in that camp in a couple of weeks. I hadn't seen any activity, and if they wanted to come and clean it up, they certainly could. And they were out there yesterday, and I believe I saw 4 guys, and they got it cleaned up, and it's gone. And so that sort of, does it take 6 weeks from the time
6 weeks
from the time we first saw the camp until it was cleaned up. And then this morning there were 2 vehicles parked up there that I think are getting ready to set up another camp.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Trainee.
John, thank you for what you do. I mean, you're providing hazmat maid service to homeless out there. We appreciate that. But I read this letter from the ACLU dated 10 October. Their last comment's interesting. It says, if Anchorage wants to reduce homelessness, it should add supportive housing. I wish ACLU would do more than file lawsuits against us, but actually help us do this. This shows they're going to, no matter what we do, they're going to still file suit against us. We have to go into this knowing that we can expect a lawsuit. And I'm willing to vote to expect a lawsuit. It's not a problem. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Croft.
So there was some talk earlier about paying homeless to clean up homeless camps. Is that part of your crew? Okay, I'll track down whether I just misunderstood or that happened. And then, so sort of summarizing what you and Mr. Dunbar are saying, if you can get control of the backlog, then this 15 to 10 days is more impactful. With a backlog, it'll only make a difference in those high priority ones that are 10 days and move to the top of your list, and so you're out there on the 10th or 15th day. But the backlog is your main problem.
We can't catch up.
There've been sort of community-wide, volunteer-based, I don't know, let's all try and do it. Or another way to say that, how much training does one need before you let them out there on hazmat or other things?
Before anybody goes onto a site, they are given the PPE and they are instructed, and that's a standard. Same with the homeless crew in the summer. Those people have to go through the whole orientation process before they walk in.
Yeah, and to clarify, when you say the homeless crew, it's the
Homeless cleanup crew,
Yeah.
dedicated to that versus community work service
Yeah.
participants.
so they're not homeless.
Is it a day of training or 2 hours or 2
We
weeks?
spend a day going through the whole process, and then we take them to a site so that they can physically see what they're getting into. And I will tell you that
Some never come back.
the crew doesn't always stay with the first 10 you hire. There are people that will go to the site, and this has happened the last 2 years. It's not for the weak stomach. So just be clear.
You lose a lot of people on that first run.
First week, you typically lose 2 or 3, and then we backfill with others who've been doing this as part of their regular duties before the homeless cleanup crew started. So for many of our staff, this is not new. We've been dealing with this for a long time. It's just that it's grown to the proportions, and hence the cleanup crews. But no, they have to be shown what they're getting into, and they have to acknowledge what it is. They need to know how to use the instruments that we provide, the PPE, and deal specifically more so with sharps, the hazmat, the PCs, and things like that. So.
Thank you, Mr. Crofts. Mr. Steele.
Yeah, you used to have volunteers in the alcohol industry. Do you still?
We
Do
have
they?
not worked with Ed O'Neill for some time, with ARPA.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were involved, but not quite to the extent that we've been engaged. On a lesser scale, they would get into areas that were not quite as disgusting.
That used to be the problem. It used to be there was a lot more alcohol involved with it. I'm not sure if that's the case now, but the thing that worries me is that they have migrated into green belts along Northern Boulevard, going down the hill at Forest Park, back up in the dense vegetation that could only be seen from the houses up above. You couldn't see it from the road, and there was a camp in there that was hard for them to find and hard to get to, but the people above were certainly upset about it. We heard it a number of times at community council meetings and stuff. But anyway, we need to get a handle on it. We need to find take some steps one way or another. It may not be the solution, but we need to show that we're making progress, or we're visible, or just getting to it. Is there a seasonal component also?
Seasonal?
Yeah. Winter time? Do you still clean up in the winter time? Is it a problem?
That's challenging,
Yeah.
because when things are covered,
Yeah.
you're at a high risk then of sending people in. You don't know what's covered by ice and snow. The last thing you want to do is have somebody poke with a sharp,
Yeah.
or get cut, or step on something, fall on something, trip over something. Our efforts are focused from, say, approximately 1 May, depending on spring. And try to bring the crew on, and of course, work them as long as funding allows. And then we'll continue with community work service all the way up till the snow hits, and then we'll drop.
Yeah.
we will continue to try to make efforts where there's more exposed, if you will, surface matter. But a lot of that's going to be down at Beans, Brother Francis, or other areas. But you don't see the same volume. But what we do know is they will, as they're doing now, is they're setting up for winter.
Yeah.
So we'll be hearing more about that pretty soon, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. So two last bites at the apple, known as Mr. Rada, Mr. Lampkin, then Mr. Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because of the length of time, how many camps would you say are being reoccupied?
Reoccupied
Mhm.
after the 15-day period?
Correct.
Not that many.
Okay. Have any of your crews ever experienced personal safety attacks? Has anybody ever, aside from the biomass hazards, have you ever had to have the police go in?
Yes.
To support you? Is it true that not only the 15 or the 10-day impediment is a problem, but that there's a proximity? In other words, if they're given a notice to move a camp, they can move it 12 inches or 12 feet away and reestablish a camp, and then we have to reintroduce notice again?
I don't know the answer to that question. Possibly Dean or Todd. I don't know if there's a distance requirement. I've never seen that. Our experience has been they don't stick around. They pack up and move, but they don't necessarily move 12 inches or 100 feet. They're 500, 600, 800 feet away. And they will often go back to a site that was previously cleaned up just because it's in that corridor. That's just what we deal with.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Lampkin. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, I'm not predisposed to overly dramatize stuff, but the health hazards that John talks about are real. I live at the end of the road regularly, but a couple times a year, pick up condoms, syringes, needles, and so on and so forth. And the risk of liability, using volunteers is a real one. I think I was on this body when the Francis Trader decision came down. And in essence, the courts ruled that the city should have protected this man from his own decisions that resulted in his death. And those are tough ones. But out of that came the Community Service Patrol, for lo these 30 years, travels around every night picking up people who are vulnerable at very significant expense. And so that's what losing the liability thing. I was interested in this discussion because if we pick up somebody's stuff and they freeze to death because we got their cold weather gear or their insulated tent and camp stove, but I think practically speaking, John's right. They vacate, and what they leave is not this kind of stuff that would have protected them from freezing to death. Many times in the decisions we have to make that are policy calls, it's not clear what's right or wrong. Often it's a triage of what are the most important rights to protect. I am a fan of the ACLU, particularly historically, and they're wanting to protect that private property as a legitimate sort of thing. We are here because we're wanting to protect public safety of the other folks and the significant impact of homeless people camping and restraining other people's activities and their peace of mind, impact on the appearance and so on and so forth of our community. And I end up agreeing with our chair saying, if you're going to sue us, we're picking up the kind of stuff we have, go for it. We'll see you in court, and so on. And that's not to disparage the ACLU, but I think Mr. Cheney is right. We can't let that risk keep us from making a principled decision, which I think Mr. Croft is after. And a subset of all this is we all know that ultimately we've got to do more, probably some very profound things with the homeless issue, but this is a very narrow one, and I think Mr. Croft's, there's no downside. to it. Anyone that's been around law enforcement know there's laws that are seldom enforced because there's not an overwhelming need to do it. You know, I've never gotten busted for being 3 miles over the speed limit. I have for being 35 miles. Yeah, so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. So speaking of the ACLU, would someone from the ACLU like to come up and just review this letter that was sent to the body?
Hey, Felix.
Oh,
I gotta
yeah,
stretch.
and actually, sorry about that. So you can go ahead and take a seat, Mr. Reynolds, and then Mr. Weddleton.
So I won't be here for the answer. That's really frustrating. It's taped. I'll listen to the tape later. But, you know, I think one thing, just in the first line of this, you see it's submitted by Assemblymember Croft. So what we know is he started out with something that seems very simple, but will be very, very complex, and we'll get to it in 6 months. If we are going to rile up Casey Reynolds, I say we really rile him up and make some difference, because I think the 10 days is not enough for the public to say, oh, okay, I feel good about things now. Because people are afraid to use our parks, and it is wrong. And we need to do something. And I'd look for something much more extensive. If we're going to do it, let's rile them up good and say, we don't want these people inside of our playgrounds. We don't want them inside of our schools, and they'll have to find somewhere else to go. And we got lots of parks, and they can go squeeze themselves into some little nook and cranny somewhere. But I don't want to see them when I'm biking down a trail or going 50 feet off a trail in a major park. It's disgusting. It's bad for our city. And I'd like to, if we're going to tackle it, let's tackle it much more significantly than this. And I appreciate you bringing it forward, as all your others. And let's dig deeper and make something significant.
You want to complicate it again?
Sure, well, you're good at that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton.
We all
All
have
right.
our skills.
All right. So,
Before he leaves, can I just address his point?
sure, Mr. Reynolds.
I'm a little bit disturbed by the idea that we don't want these people in our public places like our schools, considering a certain number of them children. I think in schools is exactly where it should be. On the letter, you have it, I think it's fairly self-explanatory. There are some, a point of it that I do want to amplify, which is obviously homelessness does not exist in a vacuum. There are policies that the administration and certainly the Assembly has been supportive of over the last 2.5 years in the work that Ms. Burke is doing on that. I want to be clear that that is not going unnoticed by the ACLU. And like we are simply a nonprofit. I know the administration likes to cast it as though we control civil law, which is actually what they're putting in their email to constituents, the ACLU civil law. We don't control the law. We're a nonprofit, and we can choose to sue or not sue or take any action as we see fit. And I want to commit to this assembly that we will and are taking notice of the fact that the city's position on homelessness and identifying, connecting homeless people with resources and finding housing for homeless people as it becomes available is not going unnoticed. So I disagree with Mr. Trainey's point that the letter in some way commits us to a lawsuit. We will evaluate what you guys finish, and you're all legislators. You know that that can change in a heartbeat. Mr. Weddleton wants to go down to maybe 5 days, which has already been found to be unconstitutional. You could take it back up to 10 business days, which would change the dynamic. So we can't commit to whether we're going to engage in any legal avenue before we see a finished product. But I don't want the impression to be given that somehow we've already committed to that. Homelessness is a broader subject, and within the scope of our organization, we will look at everything that's happening, and I want to commit to you that that is going to happen, and we're not strictly going to look at one section.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Any questions for Mr. Reynolds and the ACLU?
Mr. Chair.
Sure, Ms. LaFrance.
Actually, yes, thank you. Mr. Reynolds, I mean, would you address the issue of schools and playgrounds? Because I do share Mr. Weddleton's view that, you know, these are areas where children are present. I know you mentioned well, actually, would you clarify your reference when you said they belong in schools, or?
Well, a certain number of homeless people are children.
Okay.
We should want them in schools.
Of course.
So the idea that these people should not be in our schools, I think is a troublesome statement.
Well, and just to follow up, Mr. Chair, I
Yep.
mean, the reference we're talking about would be a homeless camp of adults, presumably near a school. Because I share your view, if there are homeless children, they belong in school and belong in a home and fed and cared for.
I think we all share that view.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, thank you for clarifying that part. The question is, do you see a way to approach schools and playgrounds by, having a set distance where, they.
Well, we would have to do additional legal review on that to see. Our first fidelity is always to the Constitution, and if there's some constitutional law that tells us that would violate people's rights, we would have a responsibility to defend that, particularly amongst people who have the least resources to defend those rights for themselves. So, and I do know there are concerns about, are the policies de facto criminalizing homelessness rather than somebody being in the wrong space? And I know from my own personal work experience in planning that sometimes when you start drawing these radiuses and then they start overlapping, you get to a point. I worked for one city where they were wanting to have a certain radius around churches and schools where you couldn't have a strip club. Then they wanted it to be a 5,000-yard radius. And when you started drawing these circles around the community, all of a sudden there's nowhere in the community for it to be. So you have de facto criminalized that activity without actually criminalizing it. So we would have, aside from the reviewing the idea for its constitutionality, I think some of the facts in terms of how big that radius is, where it is, what the impacts are, would all be matters of fact that we would have to review, and you would have to present something, and we could give you thoughts on it.
And thank you, Ms. LaFrance. I know sometimes Mr. Reynolds sounds like he is an attorney, but he is in fact not. Does Mr. Glatt have any opinion on the matter?
To add to what Mr. Reynolds has already provided, nothing specific.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Glatt. Mr. Steele.
Yeah, I'm on that particular point in terms of the green belts. The green belts and the trails run throughout the community, and there's a policy of no camping in the green belt. Do your comments in terms of the notification and whether or not they enforcement of no camping in the green belts. What's your position on that, and where do you think the limits are on enforcement?
On enforcement within green belts?
Yeah.
As a change to existing law, or?
Well, it's actually current, I suspect, in terms of the camping in the parks. They're not campgrounds.
Well, it's in keeping with current law, and we haven't chosen to challenge that yet. I don't know that we would see any reason to change that policy, but again, this is we have to see what your final work product is.
Sure.
Or more directly be brought, I know Mr. Trainee was complaining that all he ever sees from us is a letter on a policy that, to be perfectly honest, this is your meeting, your table, your building.
Sure.
We weren't brought into the process. So if we were more broadly brought into the process, we could work through maybe some of our thoughts on some of these issues as they arise, so it doesn't result in a letter or somebody thinking we're going to sue.
It would be nice if you did work with us, or if we, brought you into the discussion on it, so that we craft something that is workable and tries to solve some of the problems.
We would welcome that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Steele. Any further questions for Mr. Reynolds? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. So, do you have anything else? All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the... Oh, actually, sorry about that. Ms. Moser has informed me that we need to make a motion to extend the meeting. So if I could have a motion to extend the meeting until 12:30, please.
Move to extend the meeting till 12:30.
Okay, and all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. I don't think we'll go that long. I don't think we have much left. So we're going to go ahead and move to audience participation. So do any members of the audience wish to speak on this matter?
I have a question.
Sure.
Maybe I'm just ignorant about this, but so Seattle, where they literally declared a emergency about homelessness last year, has a 72-hour abatement policy. Why are we different? Maybe can someone explain that to me? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so could someone from law or Mr. Gates more eloquently answer that?
A legal warning, person.
I wonder if it's because, like as Fred said, do we go 35 over the speed limit?
Right.
Or is it another reason?
I don't know why. We have what we have. Our ordinance developed through a process we had at the time. If I recall right, we looked at a whole bunch of jurisdictions. So, I mean, we chose what we chose based on our circumstances here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gates. It looks like the all-knowing Ms. Burke has an answer.
Well, I just wanted to say that that was the result of a community process, and that it wasn't just about, the belongings. As I say, there's two parts of this. There's the camp, the physical structure of the camp, and then there's what's happening with the people. And there was a commitment from this community to implement changes that change the system and not just move people around. And so I also know that accompanying that 72-hour notification, Seattle implemented a larger number of shelters. And what I ask my colleagues in Seattle is, how did that help you solve the problem? You've now your bottleneck's at shelter. So if you push out and focus on housing, which you'll notice in the conversations coming out of Seattle now, that's what the push is to get to housing. So I would say it's because we're doing a complete system change. We're not just trying to move people around the community.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, Ms. Burke, did the ACLU get involved in the Seattle 72-hour rule change, or does anyone have that information?
I don't have that information. I'm sorry.
They've had it for 11 years.
What's that?
They've had it for 11 years, I believe.
Wow. Interesting. Thank you.
Yes.
Todd Sherwood, Assistant Municipal.
Thank you.
And this may state the obvious, but we do have a 72-hour. It's just that you've got to store the valuable stuff, and that requires more resources. And one, for what it's worth, thought might be, but then you always need resources, is that you don't try to take care of every camp in 72 hours, but you take care of the highly visible ones near parks, near playgrounds, near schools, or the ones where there's more crime issues and they're being reused in the same area all the time. No idea what that would cost, but it's well within the ordinance to survive scrutiny to do that. And even when you keep this, it doesn't have to be, police officer, feel free to correct me, but it's not like you have to keep it according to the standards that you do, say, criminal evidence. There's a certain standard that applies, but it's not going to be that level. To what degree that would make a difference, John might be able to address, but it would require, of course, more resources for him to have people to go in there and pick it up, as well as a big warehouse somewhere.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sherwin. And actually, that's a good segue into two requests I had. So, Mr. Rada, I think you're still here? Yes. If you could provide me and the Assembly with some numbers on the type of resources that you need, especially as we are going through our budget cycle now. So the resources you need to properly do abatement in camps. And then, I don't know if it's Ms. Burke or Department of Law could do a memo regarding the 72-hour notice and the type of resources that would be needed to actually implement that part of the code, which currently isn't being used because there are no resources for it. So those are two requests that I have. Okay, so going back to audience participation. Anyone else from the audience? Yes. If you could state your name, please, for the record.
Brian Silva, and I represent Campbell Park Community Council. Mr. Reynolds from the ACLU made a statement about homelessness and children, and I think when this group is discussing homeless, they're talking about campers, what I've heard described as campers. And when you speak of homelessness, you talk about a much larger group that is mostly composed of women and children who have entirely different issues and present an entirely different problem from the campers and drug and alcohol using group that are being discussed here. And you need to distinguish between those two, maybe with a better descriptor, because while they both are homeless groups, they are entirely different in the kinds of problems they present and the solutions you got to address.
Yes, thank you. Right before this meeting, I had another meeting where we talked a little bit about those differences, and hopefully with some of this additional information on how we can maybe use the 72-hour additional resources, we can start to develop policies that really affect the two different populations. Yes?
My name is Brunoni. I'm the Supportive Housing Division Director for ROCAP. And for years, ROCAP did homeless camp outreach, and unfortunately, we're not funded right now to do that service, so we are not doing it. But on the comment of children and campers, in our experience, most of the families that we find in camps are camping legitimately paid in Centennial Park, and when that closes down, there's an issue there. But it is not, it's certainly not common, but there are children in camps in Anchorage on occasion. The school district does some great work to reach out to them, as does many of the providers like Catholic Services and Rural Cap, to move those families rather quickly. But there are instances of families that have been found in camps on public lands.
Thank you. Anyone else like to testify? Okay, seeing no one else, are there any final member comments? Mr. Croft.
Well, just that all, so that we can continue this process, I'll take a stab at the distance you have to move, or park prohibition idea, the within 200, well, whatever distance of a school authorizes the 72-hour rather than 15 or 10. I also had asked, and I hear, Mr. Rada, that very often the campers are moved on and there's not valuables there. It does seem like even under a 10 or 15 day, if you found something like that, where we wouldn't have to preserve the camp or the sleeping bags or whatever, you would say, we will preserve whatever, a jewelry box, a Purple Heart, or whatever, even if that is rare. And then I'll research Devin's question about the Seattle 72 hour emergency ban. That's interesting. I didn't know that. And then a related but not identical issue that I'll bring back if the committee wants is, we have struggled with maybe what Mr. Dyson was getting at, areas where the owner is negligent, the owner is gone, it's in foreclosure, and it's private property, but they're not policing it. And it seems to me we're very protective, rightly, of private property rights. That is, we have a very long foreclosure process, and somebody has multiple opportunities to get their property back if they're behind on taxes, and I don't want to do anything to disturb that. That's appropriate before you take somebody's land, that you give them those opportunities. But if it's being not managed in the meantime, I talked to Mr. Falsey generally, and I'll send to Mr. Gates a limited ability for the government to come in and secure it, clean it up, and evict, right? Just say, this is in the process, nobody's taking care of it. We can kind of take care of it while whatever process happens. If they get it back, they get cleaner property. If we get it through foreclosure, then we got it cleaner. But at least it doesn't have to stay there we give them notice, they didn't do anything, we can help clean it up. Secure, clean up, and evict seem like the powers. And I'm not sure whether that should be in this or in a separate ordinance, but we can try and address that too.
All right, seeing no other comments, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.